Welcome to the Data Hall YouTube channel. In our previous 3 videos, we have discussed about vectors, matrices, and data frames. In this video, we are going to work with lists in R. So lists are quite powerful and somewhat complex data structure. The list can contain different matrices, vectors, data frames, graphs, or any kind of object. So a list is not necessarily going to have all data frames. It can have any kind of objects, and it can have any kind of data type, right? So a list can also be a list of other lists, right? So it is quite a powerful way of storing and accessing data. So let's start with working with lists. So first we create a list. So let's just say if we have this game of football and we have some data, we have this vector, and remember vector can just be a single character. We have this vector that by the name of game, which contains the name of the game. Then we have this list of players, which is a data frame, and it contains the first name, last name, and age of the players. And then we have this vector of size 3, which contains how many games are won by age of the players. So we have a data frame, a vector of length 3 and a character vector of length 1. And if we want to take these all and have a list, we just use the list function, right? So we specify the list function and give the name of the objects that we want it to have. So let's first create these, right? And if you are not familiar with vectors, data frames, then go back and watch my videos on vectors and data frames. So we have these 2 vectors and 1 data frames. This contains the name of the players, the wins by each player, and the name of the game. So I'm going to take all this and make a list, right? And now we have a list by the name of G list, which is game list, and that contains all these 3 components. So we have this first vector, which was the name of the game. Then we have the second component, which was the data frame. And then we have this third component, which was a vector of size 3. And if we click over here, we can see it is somewhat different from a data frame. A data frame would look like this, but a list would look like this. So it would have different components, but it is somewhat difficult to read what is within that components. So let's work with that. So how do we access data from a list? There are 3 different signs or 3 different ways of doing that. We have this square bracket, a single square bracket, a double square bracket, and a dollar sign. So dollar and double square bracket are one in the same thing, but dollar looks somewhat easy to use. We have this list, right? You can look at the console over here. And if I wanted to access this component, this first component, what do? I just write the name of the list, and then within a single bracket, I specify the number of the component, which is the first one. So we get the first component. But do remember the resultant component would also be a list, right? As you can see, we have used the type of. What if we wanted to access this third vector? Let's do it using double square bracket and see what is the difference between the single square bracket and the double square bracket. So I write again the name of the list, and within double square bracket, I specify the third component. So it should get me this data, right? This vector. If I press Control Enter, we get that data. And what about this? Would this be a list or a vector? And if we look at that, it is a vector of double, right? So there are numerical components. So double is a numerical data type. If we wanted to access this second component, I would have written it like this, and that should give me this data frame. But instead of accessing these data using the the numbers. One more thing that we can do is, let's just say if I wanted to access this, so here I'm accessing the third component of the list, which contains three digits, right? If I wanted to access this 15, that what would I do is I would use a single bracket and specify number 2, and that would give me 15, right? So instead of using these numbers, what we can do is we can name these lists and use names, and that would be somewhat easy to use, right? So if we look at the names of this list, if you just use the names function, and names function is used to get the names of the list, we see that we have null over here, and that says that there is no names assigned to this G list. Now we need to assign that, and we do that using this names function, specify the name of the list that we want to name, and then we give the names using this concatenation. So if I access this list, we have three components. This first component is the type of game. The second component contains the list of players, and the third component contains the game won by each player. So if I press Control Enter and let's look at the list, and now you can see that we have given the names. And if I wanted to access this first component now instead of using this curly, so these brackets, let's use this this $sign and $sign. So using the $sign as we use with the data frames, we use $sign with data frames to access a specific column, but with list we use this $sign to access a specific component. So if we do that, we get football, right? The first component. Now this is exactly similar to doing this double square brackets. So if I wanted to access the third component, that would be the games won. And if I wanted to access this number 15, then I would use $sign, name of the component, and then a number of the digit within that component. Okay, so with the data frames, we have this players data frame, and if I access this players data frame and I want to access, let me just access this player data frame. And within this player data frame, let's just say I want to access this second column. What do? Right? I use single bracket, and that would give me the second column of this player's data frame. I can also use $sign to access this player's component from the list, right? This whole component, and then use the column, the $sign to access the second column, because we are using data frame. This players is a data frame, and we know we can access a specific column using $sign to access a specific column, right? So that would give also the second column, but the difference would be that their data type would be different. With specifying the specific column, we get a character data type, but with this we get a list, right? So that depends on what you're looking for. It would be different for each different type of accessing the data. So if I wanted to access, let's just say we did this. Let me just bring the last data to console. So I wanted to access Paul. What I do is I use this again square brackets, and after the column name I access the second component. If I wanted to remove the names of the component, I remove the names within the list, and by assigning a null to the names function of the list, the names would be removed. If I can show you, now we do not have names, we just have the numbers. But names are better to use than numbers, because if you change a component within a list, if you let's just say delete a component within a list, then the names would remain same, but their indexing would change, right? So let's just say if I want to delete a component, let's just say I want to delete this first component. So what I do is I access the first component and give it a null value, and that would remove the first component. But now you see that now I wanted to access the data frame that contains the list of the players, and we know that the list of players is in index 2. If I specify the index 2, you can see that we have actually accessed the third component rather than the second component. And the reason is because when we deleted a component from the list, it changed its indexing. But that would not happen with the names. The names would remain same. So let me give the names back. And there is one more way of assigning names. So if when you are creating the list, we created this list over here, right? So we could have simply given the names, right? Like game type equal to, and then specify the name of the vector as I have done over here. So while creating the list, you can also assign a name to different components of the list. And if I can access, now we can see that we have this component being named while we are creating the list. We can add or remove a component. We have already seen how do we remove, but let's look at how do we add a component. So if I want to add a component at the 4th position, we know that we just have 3 components. So I write the name of the list and then specify the space where I want to assign, and then whatever object I want to assign it to. And if we look at the component, our list, we see that at the 4th component, we have the sentence that we assigned it. We can use names. So we do not have any raw component, right? A component by the name of raw. We can use the $sign to create that component and assign it any object. So that is what we do. We can have a list within a list. So let's create another list. And we previously had football players. So let's say we have a second game in our, let's say, match, and we have basketball, their names and their wins. And now we create the list of this second game. So this would be list 2. So we have 2 lists. One is G list, and then we have G list 2. We can see that it is a list of 5 components, and this one is the list of 3 components. If I want to get them all into a single list, let's call it all lists. And we used again the list function and combine all the lists. So now we have this all list that contains 2 lists, and each list further contains sublists. So if I wanted to access the first list, I would do that again using the double brackets. If I wanted to access the third component within the first list, so the third component within the first list, so that would be like this. And if I wanted to access this 15th number, so that would be like this. So I hope that was useful. Do subscribe to this channel and do hit the bell icon.